There comes a time in every soul's journey when silence speaks louder than affection, when absence echoes more truth than presence ever did. And sometimes, when you grow old and sit alone with memories like shadows at your feet, that's when the real revelation comes. Not in the noise of heartbreak, but in the stillness after it. You start to see clearly what you once refused to acknowledge, that many of the people you loved were not sent to stay. They were lessons dressed as partners, teachers wearing the mask of lovers. You say they left you. But what if? Listen closely now. What if you left yourself first? You stayed too long in rooms where your spirit was shrinking. You made homes out of temporary places, tried to plant roots in people who never intended to be soil. And then you wept when the storm came and carried them away. But the truth is, they were never anchored. And neither were you. This isn't bitterness. No, this is clarity born from pain. This is wisdom seasoned by abandonment and betrayal. There is no healing in pretending. There is only deliverance in truth. You weren't left behind. You were given a divine mercy, separation disguised as loss. Rejection, beloved, is often redirection. And yes, it hurts. But so does surgery that removes the infection you didn't know was killing you. Look back now. Not with tears of regret, but with eyes of understanding. Every time you chose silence over speaking your truth, you were shaping your own prison. Every time you clung to someone who gave you crumbs, convincing yourself it was enough, you were worshiping at the altar of your own loneliness. You blamed them for leaving. But you ignored the nudges, the whispers, the sleepless nights. Something deep within you, call it spirit, call it truth, call it that still small voice, was trying to open your eyes. But you wanted the fairy tale more than you wanted freedom? And now, in the later chapters of your life, you finally understand. They didn't betray you. You betrayed yourself by believing you weren't worthy of more. See, people will only treat you as poorly as you permit. Love, real love, doesn't require you to shrink. It doesn't make you question your worth every night. It doesn't leave you empty after giving your all. That wasn't love. That was survival disguised as devotion. And when you love from a place of desperation, you attract those who feed off your fear of being alone. But here you are now. Alone. Still breathing. Still standing. And in that stillness, something sacred is beginning to stir. Because now the distractions are gone. The masks have fallen. The noise has faded. And finally, you can hear the truth rising from the ashes of your old life. You were never meant to find your value in someone else's presence. You were meant to discover it in the aftermath of their absence. This loneliness, it's not punishment. It's consecration. It's a calling back to the deepest parts of yourself that you abandoned in pursuit of someone else's love. The ache you feel, it's not just sorrow. It's the birth pain of becoming. You're not breaking down. You're being broken open, and when you walk through that fire, not around it, not over it, but through it, you'll begin to see the hand that has always been guiding you. Not forcing you, but beckoning. Not condemning, but inviting. Inviting you to rise, to remember, to return to the truth that was written on your soul long before any relationship tried to rewrite it. So what do you do when you grow old and are left alone? You thank the silence. You honor the ending. And you stop blaming those who left, because maybe they were just the tool that shaped your awakening. The ones who left may never return. But the real you, the whole, fierce, grounded, radiant you, that one is just arriving. And if you listen closely, you'll hear eternity whispering, you were never abandoned. You were being realigned. There's a lie that's been preached from pulpits of pain and whispered through the corridors of broken hearts that what you felt was love. That the ache, the yearning, the need. You called it intimacy. You wrapped your arms around your own emptiness and named it connection. But deep down, when the room grew quiet and the masks fell away, you knew. It wasn't love. It was dependency. You weren't bonded. You were bound. Addiction isn't always to substances. Sometimes it's to someone's voice. To the way their presence kept you distracted from facing your own hollowness. You weren't in love with them. You were in love with how they made you forget the war inside your own soul. You needed them not because they filled you, but because they numbed you. And that, listen closely, isn't love. That's a spiritual anesthesia. You made them your lifeline, when the truth is, you were never meant to build your identity around another flawed and fragile human being. You placed them on the throne of your peace. And when they left, your world collapsed. Not because they were your world, but because you handed them the keys to a kingdom that was never theirs to govern. Somewhere along the way, you stopped asking, "Is this real love?" and started begging, "Please don't leave me." And that's the root, isn't it? The fear of abandonment. The unhealed wound from childhood or heartbreak or rejection. Whatever opened that door, it never fully closed. So instead of confronting it, you dressed it up. You fed it sweet words, romantic gestures, codependent rituals. You called it passion. But it was panic. Panic at the thought of being alone with the truth. Because if they left, you'd be left with yourself. And for a long time, you weren't sure that would be enough. But what if I told you this dependency was never divine? What if I told you it was a deception crafted to keep you spiritually asleep? Because the longer you chase validation in someone else's voice, the quieter you become to the one voice that actually heals. You were created whole. From the beginning, there was no fracture in your design. The need to be loved was placed in you, yes, but not so you'd beg for crumbs from people who can't even feed themselves. That hunger was meant to drive you upward, not outward. But somewhere along the road, pain distorted your vision. And so you clung. You clung to text messages as if they were scripture. You clung to arguments, mistaking them for passion. You clung to someone's half-love because you thought a half-love was better than none at all. And in doing so, you slowly disconnected from your own spirit. You couldn't hear the warnings. You ignored the unease in your gut. You silenced the whispers telling you this is not it. But here's the revelation: you were never meant to survive on someone else's emotional oxygen. You were designed to carry your own breath, to walk in such deep wholeness that another's presence adds joy, but never completes you. That's the lie you must burn, that you're incomplete without them, that you need them to be worthy. No, your worth was established before you ever loved, before you ever lost. You were chasing them, but heaven was chasing you. You kept asking, "Why can't I let go?" And maybe the answer is that letting go isn't just an act of will, it's an act of surrender. Of releasing the lie that you need to be needed. Of severing the soul tie to your own pain. Of choosing healing, even if it means walking through the valley of solitude. Because here's the sacred paradox: sometimes being alone is what finally makes you whole. When you no longer need them to validate your reflection, when you no longer fear the silence, when you can sit in your own presence and feel peace rising from within instead of panic, that's when you're ready for love, real love, unshackled love. Not dependency, not addiction, but sacred, mutual, fire-tested love. Until then, don't call your pain romance. Don't confuse your survival instinct with devotion. You don't need another human being to rescue you from yourself. You need to remember who called you, who formed you, and who is still shaping you through every heartbreak. And when the need fades and the clarity rises, you'll look back and say with holy fire in your voice, "I thought I was in love. But now I know. I was just afraid of meeting myself." There comes a sacred moment in every life when the noise stops. The texts stop coming. The phone goes silent. The door that used to swing open so often now stays closed. And the ones you once lived for are nowhere to be found. You're not just alone, you're isolated. And it feels like punishment, like exile. But what if I told you it's not exile, it's encounter? What if the silence isn't absence, but presence in disguise? See, the world trains you to fear loneliness. It teaches you to keep the music loud, the conversations constant, the distractions flowing, so you never have to face what's underneath. Because underneath is where the questions live. The questions you've buried under relationships, under business, under survival. And yet, in the isolation, those questions start knocking. Who am I when no one needs me? Who am I when I'm not being loved, desired, or celebrated? And that's the place, the holy ground, where the mirror is held up. Not the mirror of social media. Not the mirror of compliments or criticism. No, the mirror of truth. It shows you not what the world sees, but what heaven sees. It shows you the parts of yourself you've forgotten, neglected, or avoided. It reveals the wounds you've dressed up with smiles. It exposes the idols you've built out of people, plans, and possessions. It is in that place that everything false is stripped away, and the stripping hurts. Let's not pretend it doesn't. When your identity was wrapped in someone else's presence, their absence feels like death. But it's not death, it's deliverance. It's mercy disguised as loss. Because sometimes, to find your true self, everything false must be burned off like chaff in the fire. And this fire doesn't consume, it purifies. So many people pray for revelation, for transformation, for deeper understanding. But when isolation shows up, they rebuke it. Not realizing it is the answer to their prayer. Because in isolation, there are no performances. There are no masks left to wear. There's just you, and the whisper that has always been speaking, even when you couldn't hear it. You've been surrounded your whole life, and still felt unseen. You've been celebrated by many, yet misunderstood at your core. And now you're finally in a place where no one is clapping, no one is calling, no one is applauding. That silence. It's the holy echo that precedes revelation. Because when the world gets quiet, heaven gets louder. This is where you learn to hear again. This is where the voice that spoke light into darkness begins to speak into your soul, not to flatter, not to condemn, but to awaken. And it says, you are more than the abandonment, more than the label, more than the heartbreak, more than the role you played for others, more than what you've lost. It says you are still becoming. That's why the isolation hurts. It interrupts your illusions. It calls you out of the life you constructed and into the life you were destined for. It confronts your coping mechanisms. It exposes where your trust was misplaced, and it calls you to a deeper anchoring, not in people, not in circumstances, but in truth that cannot be shaken. And the truth is this: your worth is not up for negotiation. You are not being punished. You are being positioned. You are not forgotten. You are being forged. And in this quiet, in this holy stillness, you begin to hear the instructions. You begin to receive the blueprint not for surviving, but for building. Building a life that doesn't crumble when people leave. Building a soul that can carry peace even in the absence of applause. Building a relationship with the eternal that makes every earthly connection secondary, not central. This is where the next chapter begins. Not when someone returns to love you, but when you return to love yourself with the same fierceness you gave away so freely. So no, this isolation is not your undoing. It is your unveiling. And when it is done, when the silence has done its sacred work, you won't just emerge healed. You'll emerge whole, complete, unshakable. Not because someone stayed, but because you learned how to stand. And that is when you stop fearing the silence and start hearing the call. There's a moment in every heart, wounded soul when you look back and ask, how did I let it go that far? Not in anger, but in awakening. Because time, when given room to breathe, starts to unveil the patterns we were too desperate to see. And that's when the deepest healing begins. Not when you replay what they did to you, but when you finally confront why you accepted it. It's time to forgive yourself, not just for loving them, but for ignoring who they really were. You thought they could love you. You hoped they would. You believed that if you gave enough, waited long enough, endured enough, something inside them would rise and match the depth you carried. But hope, when unanchored from truth, becomes a silent form of self-harm. You weren't weak. You were loyal. You weren't blind. You were deeply willing to believe. And yet, deep down, something always felt off. The words they said didn't match their actions. The love they offered came with terms and conditions. You had to shift just to keep the peace. You had to shrink just to be tolerated. And still, you told yourself, maybe tomorrow they'll see me. Maybe next week they'll try. Maybe one day they'll become who I prayed they were. But listen carefully. They were not capable of loving you the way you needed to be loved. And that is not a reflection of your inadequacy. That is a revelation of their limitations. There are people who carry charm but lack capacity. There are souls that glitter in moments but crumble under the weight of consistency. There are hearts that want to love, but do not know how to. And you cannot pour your destiny into someone who is still breaking under the weight of their own denial. Forgive yourself for trying to plant gardens in their deserts. You brought life. You brought water. You brought light. But they were committed to shadows. You gave the kind of love that should have healed them. But healing isn't received by force. It must be chosen. And the pain you're feeling now isn't just the wound of their leaving. It's the ache of having ignored your own inner voice. That quiet whisper that told you something wasn't right. That ache in your chest when you felt unseen, unheard, misunderstood. But stayed anyway. This is not a moment for shame. It's a moment for alignment. Because there is wisdom rising now. Wisdom that says, I will no longer negotiate my worth in the court of someone else's confusion. Wisdom that says, I will no longer try to resurrect a connection that was never rooted in truth. You were not stupid. You were hopeful. You were not foolish. You were faithful. And now, it's time to turn that same faithfulness toward yourself. See, forgiveness isn't just for them. It's for you. It's the key that unlocks your future from the chains of your past. And you can't walk forward carrying guilt for being human, for being open, for wanting love so badly that you tolerated half versions of it. You loved with a wide open heart. You stayed when it cost you peace. You kept showing up, hoping they'd evolve. And that was beautiful. Until it became bondage. But now you see it. Now you feel it. Now the veil is lifting. The fog is clearing. And the divine whisper that's been with you since the beginning is speaking louder than ever. It wasn't your job to fix them. It was your calling to free yourself. Because true love doesn't demand you disappear to keep it alive. True love meets you where you are and invites you deeper. Not further away from your identity, but closer to it. What you experienced wasn't your destiny, it was your detour. And detours, when submitted to divine timing, always lead you back to the path of wholeness. So now, take a breath. Release the blame. Let go of the question, why wasn't I enough? And replace it with this truth. You were more than enough. They just weren't ready to receive it. And that is not your failure. That is your freedom. So walk forward. Not with bitterness, but with boldness. Not with regret, but with revelation. Because the same spirit that led you through the valley will now raise you into the mountaintop of identity, clarity, and authority. And this time you will not apologize for being too much. Because you've finally learned, you were never too much. You were just never meant to be measured by people who live in lack. There will come a time, if it hasn't already, when you'll sit alone in a room once filled with laughter, love, noise, and movement. And in that sacred quiet, a question will rise like smoke from the ashes of what used to be. Who am I now? When they leave, when the children grow, when the one you built your world around walks out or passes on or simply forgets how to love you right. When the applause stops, when the messages go silent, when the need others had for you dissolves into memory, who are you then? That's where the revelation begins. Because the truth is, most of us were never taught how to live without leaning. We were taught how to build around others, but not how to be whole within ourselves. And somewhere along the way, we confused love with completion. We started looking for someone not to walk beside us, but to carry us. We made others responsible for our joy, our identity, our peace. And in doing so, we handed over the blueprint of our soul to people who didn't even know how to build themselves. So when they left, or when life pulled them away, you crumbled. But hear me now, you were never meant to be a house built on someone else's foundation. You were always designed to be a temple, strong, sacred, and self-sustaining. A place where purpose dwells, not just pain. Where meaning flows from within, not siphoned off someone else's presence. This is the holy awakening. When the ache of absence forces you to look inward, not for another to love you, but for your love, your mission, your divine assignment. The goal was never just companionship. The goal was calling. You weren't placed here simply to be loved. You were placed here to build, to birth something eternal, to leave a mark that doesn't fade when a person walks away. You've been told to wait. Wait for someone who understands you. Wait for someone who sees you. Wait for someone who stays. But I say to you now, stop waiting for someone to give you permission to live fully. Build the life they said you couldn't. Not out of spite, but out of sacred clarity. Build a life so full of vision, devotion, and purpose that when love comes, it's not as oxygen, but as overflow. Do not make love your foundation. Make it a companion. And yes, love is beautiful. Yes, partnership is sacred. But anything that becomes your source becomes your idol. And idols cannot sustain you when life fractures. But truth stands. Purpose stands. Divine design stands. You were woven with intention. There's fire in your bones not meant to be contained by whether or not someone chooses you. You were already chosen. Long before they said yes, and long after they said goodbye. So build. Build something so rooted in vision that even solitude bows in respect. Build routines that nourish your spirit. Build dreams that don't wait for validation. Build the discipline that doesn't flinch in winter. Plant seeds in silence and watch heaven bring the rain. And let your wholeness speak. Let it testify. Let it say to every former version of you who thought love was the goal, no, love was the mirror that exposed what was missing. And now that you've seen it, you will not go back to being half. You will not dim your light for comfort. You will not dilute your calling to keep someone's attention. You've seen too much. You've felt too deeply. You've wept in isolation, prayed in confusion, and now you are becoming. Not because someone stayed, not because someone arrived, but because the spirit within you would not let you die unfinished. So hear this, and let it etch itself into your bones. You are not waiting for love. You are walking in it. Love is not something you find in another person. It's what awakens in you when you finally realize you were never incomplete. And when that revelation lands, when that sacred knowing settles into your spirit like dawn breaking over dark waters, everything changes. Because the day you stop searching for someone to complete you is the day you become someone even solitude admires.